Hi, welcome. I'm Erik Linask, and thanks for joining us in this edition of TMC Newsroom on the Road. I'm sitting here in Dallas, Texas at the historic Stone Lee Hotel with Vanillasoft's president, Ken Murray. Ken, thanks for joining us this morning.
Hey, Erik, thank you for having me.
So we were just talking off camera a little bit. You were telling me a little bit about the transition that you saw, particularly in the last year or so, from companies that had traditionally focused on larger outside sales forces, becoming a little more interested in some of the stuff Vanillasoft's doing.
Yeah, you bet. I think one of the things we saw, Erik, last year, kind of through, I hate to use the term economic meltdown, but let's call it what it was. That's what it was. Is we started seeing a lot of companies kind of pull back on their outside sales efforts and move more inside and get focused on inside sales, which obviously was good for our business. As you know, we make software that supports inside sales people. So we saw a couple of shifting dynamics that were very interesting. We saw a lot of our customer base downsize, like so many companies sadly did through that, but we also saw a lot of companies adapt new technologies as for the first time they focused on inside sales and started looking for a way to enable that effort and to better understand how to move their products and services over the telephone versus having a large outside sales force.
So when you've got companies like that who are transitioning from an outside to an inside sales force, what kind of challenges or obstacles do they have to overcome, and you know, how do you help them do that?
That's a good question. I think, first of all, is just understanding that whole process. You know, one of the first things, once again, good for companies like us, is they know, okay, we no longer have people in cars running around and driving. We want to get everybody into a facility. So they start thinking immediately about, okay, is this a small inside sales group? Is this a contact center? You know, how do we make this transition? How are our customers going to adjust to us being on the telephone versus oftentimes being in person? So I think one of the first things they look for is they look for a way to enable that, and they look for some type of Salesforce automation software or CRM, and that's kind of where the industry is right now. Companies initially always seem to migrate to the term CRM because that's what they're comfortable with. That's what everybody hears. That's what everyone knows. And after they kind of go down that road, they realize, well, there are all these other things we want to do. We just don't want to store the data and have the data and be able to report on the data. We really want to take these 10 people or these 20 people and enable them in some ways. And that's typically where they'll reach out to companies like us because we kind of deliver that enablement side. We can give you kind of the functionality of the core CRM features, but we can also do all those more aggressive things that helps inside sales groups become more productive. You know, we can provide progressive dialing and onboard scripting, you know, integrated email, and some of the enablement that they need to really kind of get a lift when they're getting this process started.
So you mentioned a couple of the features or characteristics of the solutions that people are looking for. What are some of the big key pieces that your customers are looking for?
You know, it varies depending on how far the organization is into it. But I think the biggest one is people now love real-time reporting. They like to look, especially if they're just emerging into it. They like to say, okay, we've got these people here, and we've got all of these leads going on, right? We've got leads we've acquired, we've got our prospects, we've got our customers. There's a lot going on right now in the industry with trigger leads, where leads are getting created in real time, and these are pretty expensive leads. They really want to know that as these leads get created, either from their website or from a third-party provider, that they're getting into the system and that they're getting deployed to the salesperson, and more importantly, that the salesperson is calling them and doing something, and that there's a dispositioning process going on. In our world, I guess one of our claims to fame is that the moment one of these trigger leads or web leads is actually created, we get it to the desktop of a person in about 2.1 seconds with clear visibility that a manager can look and say, okay, lead got created, leads in the system, leads being worked. So I think that's one of the big ones. And a really another big enabler that people love is they love some form of progressive dialing. The term auto dialing is out there. But a lot of studies have shown that, especially for a kind of a new inside sales group, that people have a tendency to kind of want to look at the leads for a while or look at the name on the screen as though through osmosis they're going to discern something of great value, right? If I look at it long enough, I can decide I probably don't want to call this guy. So kind of in this whole new enablement world, one of the things we see is they like for that record to arrive and dial. And lucky for us, that's one of the features we provide. And also some ability, they call it lead scoring now, we just call it next best call logic, where some of the fundamental core principles that the company uses to determine these are the leads or the opportunities we want you working, that next best call logic. Something going on in the background that allows the sales organization to get the best leads first and kind of sort those and route those out. So those are two of the real big ones.
Well, when you talk about real-time leads and real-time lead management, it almost seems like you've got to have some sort of automation in the process, because I'm not sure that the sales force itself is always prepared to deal with real-time data.
Well, you're absolutely right. In the world today, with the availability, with what's going on, we'll call it kind of the Sales 2.0 world, where there's all of this information available, and there's all these new applications that go and look in LinkedIn and look for who's tweeting about what, and look for a jigsaw that's looking who within this organization is in the sales and marketing department. You have so many moving parts. You need a system on the front end of that is sorting all of that data, applying the best practices that the company's created, sorting it, and then routing it out to those inside salespeople. So I think you're absolutely right about that. We kind of set at that nexus of lead management with pretty robust CRM features, and then those top-line enablers, once again, with the auto dialing, the progressive dialing, the kind of the onboard messaging that is unique to teams. A good example would be in the world of trigger leads and all these different leads that are acquired, each one may need to be treated and nurtured and communicated differently. So in the Vanillasoft world, we look at that before it ever gets to the sales rep level. The system looks at it, once again, looks at those best practices and said, this type of lead that just was, say it's a mortgage lead that was created by a company that creates trigger leads based on some event within the marketplace. Our system will look in that and say, okay, this is a particular type of trigger lead. This should go to team A that has those people particularly skilled and adept at handling those types of leads. And it should supersede the 5 leads that are left over from yesterday that have never been contacted. So once again, I think you're correct about that. It takes a lot now to manage all these moving parts.
Sure. And I want to touch on one more thing here. You mentioned Twitter and a couple of other similar capabilities.
Yeah.
How big of a role do you see social media playing in the sales effort?
That's the million-dollar question. I talked to a lot of my colleagues, and we're all trying to really honestly get our minds wrapped around it because it's moving very fast. And, I always jokingly say, I'm an old guy. I've been in the game a long time, and I can remember back when, telemarketing was going to destroy all of the outside sales world. Then along comes email, and they say, well, email will end all telemarketing, right? That's going to end. Now we're in a world where social media is going to end all forms of selling over the phone and cold calling, but I'm still old school. At the end of the day, somebody's got to call someone for something to happen. It's still got to happen. So when companies ask me that question, I say, I use our own company. We spend about 10 to 20% of our time now focused on social media, understanding it, participating in it ourselves, and 80% of our time in the core value of what we know drives sales. The things that are tried and true for us, our best marketing practices, our best sales practices. But I think it's going to be very important because I think for the first time, companies can kind of reveal a little bit about who's behind that closed door. They can use LinkedIn and Jigsaw to go in and get a little bit more in depth. I think the balancing act, which I think is going to be fascinating to see how this unfolds, is going to be how much time do you spend researching a prospect before you just pick up the phone and call them? There's so much written. The bloggers are, 24 hours a day are blogging about this, and everybody's trying to find that balance right now. And I think it'll be a couple more years before we find out what that balance is because, once again, kind of being an old school guy, if you can do great in-depth research on 5 prospects, learn everything you want to know about them, and call them, and you get 1 sale, that's great. But if you can cold call 20 and get 2 sales, at the end of the day, that's still better. So I think time will play this out. But I think we will see a combination of platforms like ours, the folks in Salesforce Automation, being able to tap into those social media links and pull that into their platform and push it out as just kind of part of the business intelligence that goes along with those contacts.
Makes sense. It certainly seems like a safe approach, a logical approach, working your way into the social media aspect.
I think so.
We've been talking here in this edition of TMCnet Newsroom on the Road in Dallas with Vanillasoft's Ken Murray. Ken, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate it.